Today, we have a speaker who has been here. Newt Gingrich has been here 14 times. That's more than I count. He's been here actually 14 times. He was here when he was speaker. We honored him in Washington. I could add those appearances that he did for our conferences there. He's a great friend of the Richard Nixon Foundation, as is his wife, Callista. Callista has a new book, one of her series of Ellis the Elephant, the most patriotic pachyderm you'll ever read about. This one is From Sea to Shining Sea. And these are great gifts for your kids, for your grandchildren, for the annoying children who live next door, for people you don't even know, or for yourself. You get tired of those heavy, 500-page books. This is fun. Breaks up the Fox News during the day. She'll sign this tonight if you'll get it in our museum store, as will the speaker sign the new trade cover edition of his bestseller, Breakout. Here are two authors with repeated, consistent New York bestsellers. And autographed copies make great additions to anybody's home office or a library, home or office library. 20 years ago, Newt Gingrich came up with a phenomenal creative idea called the Contract for America. This is the 20th anniversary of that great document. It changed Congress and it changed our country. It changed history. He is one of the most visionary people, insightful people I've ever met or listened to or read about. I was watching Fox yesterday, and on Chris Wallace's show, they commented that it was the 20th anniversary and that there has never been a document of bolder and better ideas than the 1994 Contract for America by Newt Gingrich. We have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, accompanied by the grandson of President Nixon and his wife Andrea, Chris Cox, the grandson of the president. Please welcome Speaker Newt Gingrich and his wife Andrea. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Callista and I are thrilled to be here and have a chance to share ideas, and we look forward to seeing a number of you afterwards to talk about our books and to sign our books. I liked the term that Sandy had, that Ellis is a patriotic pachyderm. I think that captures it pretty well. He's not a Republican pachyderm or a conservative pachyderm. He is an American pachyderm and represents hopefully all the values that made this country great. And her newest book, From Sea to Shining Sea, he goes on Lewis and Clark's expedition and crosses the nation. So it's pretty fun and pretty exciting, particularly it's aimed at 4 to 8-year-olds. Although her mother says it's actually good for 4 to 80 because of a lot of facts you'd forgotten that come back up. First of all, it's great to be back here. I was a little sobered when Sandy told me that we'd been here 14 times, but I'm nonetheless glad to be here. I think it's a very important institution. President Nixon was an extraordinary important part of American public life. from 1946 on, and a little bit like Henry Kissinger, created an entire additional career as a writer and a scholar and somebody who continued to have an impact on public life. So I'm delighted to be here. And I think having living institutions like this, where people can come and learn and see things, and is really important in keeping alive an understanding of America. So we're always glad to be here and to try to be both helpful to the Nixon Library, but also to share ideas. I'm going to talk about three very big ideas. I'm not going to give a formal speech because I want to leave enough time to go to Q&A and give you a chance to ask what you want to know about. But I want to make 3 points about where we are as a country that I think capture 3 of the major crossroads that we're at. One of the points is going to be very, very optimistic. The other 2 raise challenges that are not necessarily definitive, but that are very real, and that we're going to have to rise to the occasion. I'm going to talk first about the transition from the manual typewriter to the smartphone and the iPad, and its implication for everything we do as citizens and in government, which will be a revolution larger than any change we've seen in government systems since the Founding Fathers. And over the next 20 to 30 years, it means the young people who are here from the various colleges will be part of the most creative generation, rethinking how to solve problems and rethinking how to get things done that we have seen since the original Founding Fathers. I'm going to talk second about the 2 great epidemics we're faced with. Part 1 will be talking about ISIS, which I think is best understood as an epidemic, as an epidemiological problem, and part 2 will be talking about Ebola and the challenge we face there. So I'm going to cover those 3 topics. The transition in technology and what it could mean for us if we are clever and take advantage of it, the challenge we have from ISIS and the challenge we have from Ebola. Let me start with this, I think, remarkably optimistic, positive moment in American history. And I'm going to do it by using 2 very simple examples that are in all of your lives. How many of you have ever gone to an automatic teller machine outside the United States to get money? If you got money outside the U.S., raise your hand. Look around the room. It's a third to almost half the room, right? So let me describe this so you understand this is not a theory. I'm in the same sense that Adam Smith was describing reality when he talked about a needle factory in The Wealth of Nations, because he actually had seen a needle factory. I am describing something real. You walk up to an anonymous machine anywhere in the world, except maybe North Korea, parts of Somalia, and the outskirts of Yemen. But generally speaking, in very large parts of the world, you walk up to an anonymous machine. You put in a plastic card. The machine lights up with 6 to 8 languages. You pick one of the ones you're really good at, often English. You put in a 4-number code. I did this back in April in Kazakhstan, and it reached out over 10 time zones, 7 international borders, found my bank, verified my account, validated I had enough money, and gave me the local currency and the amount I had plugged in. And I actually did not know what the exchange rate was, but I assumed it was better than the hotel. Now, that takes about 11 seconds. It takes 3 seconds on the internet and 8 seconds typing. By comparison, it takes 277 days to move documents from the Defense Department to the Veterans Administration. Let me give you the second example of this. When you use an ATM locally or internationally, how many of you find that it's almost always accurate? You plug in $200, you get $200, right? I mean, is this a general experience here? Which is why you use it, right? I mean, if it was inaccurate, you wouldn't go back to it. Now, we're describing a worldwide information system. that tracks accurately millions of transactions a day. By contrast, last year, the Internal Revenue Service sent $4 billion in inappropriate refunds to people who shouldn't have gotten them, of which my favorite was 343 checks sent to one house in Shanghai. Now ask yourself, you send one check to Shanghai, that's a mistake. You send 2 checks to Shanghai, it's an embarrassment. You send 3 checks to Shanghai, it's an outrage. How do you describe a bureaucracy that could have sent 343 checks to one house in Shanghai and not noticed? This was not the record last year. The record last year was in Lithuania, where a house got 450 refunds it wasn't supposed to get. I mean, you can imagine the joy. I mean, wouldn't that be your reaction? You're sitting around Lithuania one Tuesday, and the mailman drops by and goes, "Hi, here's 450 checks from the U.S. government." You go, "I knew my uncle would come through someday." So, the difference of speed, accuracy, convenience, lack of human interface. Notice, you go use an ATM, you're the teller. You put on all the information tellers used to put in. You don't get paid, you don't get vacation, you don't get health care, you don't have a pension, and you get to do it 24/7, and you're grateful. So we're externalizing work onto the consumer in a way that the consumer is grateful for. So that's part one of this exposition. Part two, smartphones. Okay, how many of you have a smartphone? Raise your hand if you have a smartphone. Okay. I'm curious, how many of you have old-fashioned cell phones? Okay, hardcore conservative group, okay. How many of you refuse to have either a cell phone or a smartphone? I mean, okay, 1 or 2 here, I love this, and 1 or 2, sort of the last stand of the old order, I can imagine him now, he goes down the street with his 3 passenger pigeons in his little frame, and when he needs to send a signal, he writes the message down. So, for those of you who entered the modern world and have a smartphone, and by the way, 74% of the country now has a smartphone. How many of you have GPS on your phone? How many of you use it when you're going someplace you've never been before? Now, here's the real killer, okay? How many of you no longer carry maps in your car? I mean, think about this as a revolution. As recently as 1987, I was at Fort Irwin getting lost because land navigation in the Army is very complicated. And as recently as 1990, I was in Saudi Arabia at Desert Shield, flying in Blackhawks, which had GPS only because the Army pilots had gone to Sears and bought their own, because the Army had not yet installed GPS. Now, everybody has it. And it's astonishing how effective it is. But you can go through a whole list of these things, and they're all there. Have any of you visited the Khan Academy? K-A-H-N? Okay, raise your hand. If you've been to the Khan Academy, raise your hand. Look around the room. 10 million people a month go to the Khan Academy. It's probably the leading science and math teaching center in the world. So it's all free. How many of you found it actually was useful? Right? Okay. There are schools that now, for entering freshmen, colleges, that tell entering freshmen, if you need remedial math, start by taking the Khan Academy. You don't get a teacher till after you've gotten done at the Khan Academy. Have any of you been to Duolingo, D-U-O-L-I-N-G-O? You have? Anybody else? One over there. Duolingo is a site which teaches 7 different languages. Khan Academy is free. Duolingo is free. It teaches 7 languages. Google estimates that more people today take foreign language on Duolingo than all the language classes in the U.S. combined. So you're at the edge of a new world. Do any of you have medical apps on your smartphone? I'm just curious. Anybody want to, one over here? Anybody else? Run there, back there, over there. Dr. Michael Burgess is a congressman. And you may have seen him during the recent hearings on Ebola. He's a very smart guy. He has an EKG on his smartphone. I got one because I had sort of EKG envy. And cost about $100. And you hold, it's an attachment you put on your smartphone, you hold it, it does an EKG, and it then sends it to your cardiologist and prints it out for you. So you have a real-time 24/7 EKG device. He also has an oxygen device to find out what % oxygen he has in his blood system. He has a sugar device. He has 8 different apps that he carries. There are today 93,000 health applications available for smartphones. Now here's the model I want you to think about. Because some of this is kind of interesting, but what does it mean? Well, here's what it means. All modern bureaucracy is parallel historically to the rise of the typewriter. So it's really built around the power of the manual typewriter. The high water mark of modern bureaucracy in 1943 was the opening of a building that has 17.5 miles of corridor and holds 31,000 people, because we were trying to wage a global war using manual typewriters with carbon paper. So if you were a conservative who was interested in modernizing, who was both pro-defense and pro-saving money, one of your platform planks would be to reduce the Pentagon to a triangle. And I would argue you would get better defense, faster, less expensively, in closer touch with reality if you had 40% fewer people in the Pentagon. Now, that's the beginning of change. If you want to see a lot more about this, you can go to gingrichproductions.com. We do a podcast every week and 2 newsletters that are free. And the most important recent speech I've done was at the American Enterprise Institute in August. And I outlined this choice. Let me say up front, the Veterans Administration is corrupt, incompetent, and incapable of reform. I mean, you can spend all the time you want to trying to fix it, and you have so many people who have imbued so many habits and are so used to covering for incompetence, you will never reach into that system deeply enough. Or you could say, what if we invented a 21st century veterans service system that started by empowering the veteran with a smartphone and then built the support mechanisms around that? Example, the veteran with their smartphone could actually make their own doctor's appointment. So the Los Angeles Veterans Hospital could not eliminate 3,000 people in order to have a shorter line. And they would know, because it would come up on an automatic system, if they didn't get their appointment in a certain number of days. There's a firm called ZocDoc, Z-O-C-D-O-C, which was designed to figure out how to use modern technology to help people find doctors faster. And what they discovered was that the average doctor has every 4th patient break their appointment. So if you have 12 people lined up for tomorrow as a doctor, what you know is that 3 of them probably won't show up. And traditionally, doctors had that spare time. So what ZocDoc does is they come along and say, look, we'll fill the spare time. And you'll make money out of time you would not have been able to make money on. They then say to you, if you need to see a doctor, you put in your name, your insurance, your zip code, and you have 40 choices of specialties. And we will search and in a matter of minutes tell you which doctors are available that are closest to you. They now do 5 million reservations a year. Their total staff is 400 people. The Veterans Administration has 1,000 people working as programmers on an obsolete language that's 20 years out of date. And you just look at the difference in these 2 systems, and it's unbelievable. And if you were serious about serving veterans, you would you would lease the ZocDoc technology and bring it into the VA next week. And in a matter of weeks, you'd begin to have a totally different model. So we're at the edge of extraordinary opportunities. We're at the edge of an opportunity to say to every poor child in America, here's a way to learn language for free, and here's a way to learn math and science for free. Today, in a lot of schools, if that student takes out their smartphone, it'll be confiscated. So we go to enormous effort to get computers put into the school so the student can use it 1 hour a week, while the student is walking around all day carrying a computer. This is a 2003 laptop in computing power. Now that understates what it really is access to the entire planet through the internet. But its actual internal computing power is a 2003 laptop. The newest Apple is, which is the Apple 6, is 8,400% more powerful than the original iPhone. All that's happened in less than a decade. So we need to rethink from the ground up. What if students could learn 365 days a year? What if your choice, instead of trying to reform LA Unified, which is hopeless, okay? I mean, again, I think it's time we tell the truth. The truth is, the teachers union loves LA Unified because it performs at 100% efficiency at one job. It pays their checks. And the purpose of LA Unified, as seen by the teachers union, is to pay checks. So they don't understand what all the complaints are about. But what if we said, we're going to make sure that every child in LA has 24/7 access to the opportunity to learn? And if they learn, we're going to give them a chance to go to college because they'll get a scholarship with the money they're going to save us. I'm just giving you a flavor of the scale of change that's coming. I believe the transition from the manual typewriter to the smartphone and the iPad will be the largest change since the Founding Fathers, because it changes from a bureaucrat-centered, rule-based model to you being in charge. You can decide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When do you want to study? When do you want to learn? When do you want to do other things? You can monitor your blood sugar 24 hours a day. You no longer have to go and sit and wait for somebody else to do it. And all of this technology is coming down the road very rapidly. In my book, we describe the contest between pioneers of the future who are inventing all of this and prison guards of the past who are desperately trying to stop the future. I will get to several of those in my next two topics. So that's part one. Domestically, we should insist from city council, county commission, school board, state government, federal government on a dramatic overhaul that moves all of them into the 21st century. We will have a citizen-centered system. It will be less expensive, more effective. It will liberate the country, and we will in fact be the most dynamic country in the world again and create the most exciting jobs and have the best quality of life. All of that's potentially available, and you experience it every day. Just the next time you deal with the government, remember the speed of your phone and the speed of your ATM card, and then watch the incompetence of the bureaucracies. And ask yourself, why are you putting up with this? You wouldn't in the private sector. I mean, if you had a private company that was this incompetent, they'd go bankrupt. So we have a great opportunity here. Second topic, ISIS. Let me just say, first of all, the president's strategy has zero chance of working. Now, I don't say this to be tough about Barack Obama. I would tell you that I thought President Bush's strategy had zero chance of working. And the reason is pretty simple. Radical Islamism is a viral movement closer to Ebola than to nation-state politics. So when somebody runs in and says, are we going to fight them in Iraq or are we going to fight them in Syria, they totally miss out what's going on. Because you have to be willing to fight them in Oklahoma City. You have to be willing to fight them at Fort Hood. And when you have an administration that says that a guy who jumps up, yells Allahu Akbar, has in his wallet warrior of Allah, and has been regularly corresponding with a radical cleric in Yemen, and that is described as a workplace incident, what you have is an elite that is crazy. This is not a complicated issue. They're crazy. The State Department on most of these issues is crazy. And how do you possibly have a rational strategy when the people you go to for a strategy are crazy? I mean, I'll give you a very simple test case. that I would challenge every network and every newspaper to follow. Anytime you interview an expert on Islam who is funded by the Saudis or Dubai or the UAE, you should list under it they get their money from Saudi Arabia. And you will instantly discover that most of the academic apologists are funded by people who don't share our values at all. And yet they pose as though they are neutral observers, academic students. So, what does it lead to? Boko Haram, which is a branch of radical Islamism, was not recognized by the State Department as a terrorist organization until 2013. And the argument was, well, they're really a local group in northern Nigeria. And they're really not part of any international network. Now, what's amazing about this is, if you did any research, you discovered that in 2001, when Boko Haram was organized, this is the group that kidnapped the 200 girls, when they were organized, their base camp was called Afghanistan. Now, you would think in a conversation with rational people, if you said, explain to me why a Nigerian local group is using the term Afghanistan to describe their base camp if you think they're not part of a world movement. And of course, the reason they were using Afghanistan was a tribute to the Taliban, who they identify with. Now, why do they identify with the Taliban? Because they represent radical Islamism. They want to wipe out all of the Christian churches in Nigeria. They want to create Sharia. They want to totally turn the country into an Islamic movement. And they see themselves, they talk about themselves, they go to meetings internationally. You know, they have international terrorist gatherings where they get to compare notes. How's your terrorism going? Well, we had a bad week last week, but I think we've, have you solved the problem of really getting on TV more often? Well, we find personally beheading works really well. I mean, these people gather in these kind of conversations. And the State Department just couldn't bring itself to recognize this because the depth of the intellectual sickness in the State Department is so deep. So you can't design, the strategy you have to design is a world strategy that literally is, it's epidemiology fully as much as Ebola is. And so you got to say to yourself, why is it there are over 100 Americans who have now joined ISIS? Why is it that there are recruiters in Chicago and recruiters in Minneapolis, St. Paul? And what should we do about it? Why is there a recruiter in Great Britain who goes down to a local coffee shop to eat sweets and talk to the reporters, who says cheerfully, oh, we're going to win, and the black flag will fly over 10 Downing Street, and the black flag will fly over White House, and we do nothing about it? Now, this is an intellectual, moral disarmament that makes it impossible to sustain civilization. And so at some point down the road, when the current strategy fails, we're going to have a national debate. Because if we intend to defeat the worldwide movement, and the latest estimate last week was that there are 15,000 foreign fighters in ISIS from 80 countries. Now, surely that fact alone should lead serious analysts to say, gee, who's left behind in the 80 countries? Who's doing the recruiting? Who's raising the money? Who's part of this movement? But to deal with this so we get fixated on one town on the edge of the Turkish border is childish. And so we need a fundamentally new approach to ISIS. Let me close with Ebola. Ebola is going to turn out to be one of two things. It's going to be an outbreak in West Africa that we ultimately overpower and isolate, and which we've done now again and again since 1976. And we will look back and we'll say, well, you know, it really wasn't that big a deal. Or Ebola is going to become an outbreak which at some point gets into 3 or 4 major cities that have very bad public health systems and suddenly explodes. In which case we're going to look back and say, why didn't we panic earlier? Now, I'm not a medical person, so I'm fully as qualified as the guy President Obama picked to But I have one advantage over him. I am a historian, so I have some understanding, for example, of the Black Death in medieval Europe. I would advise as a historian that it is always better to overreact to an epidemic. Because if you spend a little extra effort and you work a little extra hard and it disappears, the downside is you wasted some time, you wasted some money, but it's gone. And if you underreact to the epidemic and it actually catches fire, I mean, if it gets in 1 or 2 cities in India, or if it gets to Lagos in Nigeria, you're in a different world. And I would just say to you that we should be right now, we should be aggressively overhauling the Food and Drug Administration. We should be very tough-minded about looking at the National Institute of Health. I have been a big supporter. As Speaker of the House, I helped double the budget while we were balancing the federal budget. So we set priorities and we doubled the budget of NIH. So I'm happy to put my credentials up there. But I am very disturbed when I am told that it was the absence of money. No, it was the wrong priority in the wrong bureaucracy behaving in a way that was highly ineffective. And I am against giving more money to NIH or any other federal agency until it is overhauled and reformed. Because the same bureaucrats who failed over the last decade, they have had an amazing amount of money. And they have spent a lot of it on truly stupid things, often politically directed by the White House. And to then turn and say to us, oh, if only we'd had more money. I don't believe it. And the truth is, you can always theoretically explain why you should always have more money for any good cause. But what we should have is a decision that says, what is the maximum we could possibly spend? I frankly will tell you, if you're worried about American health, you would be a lot more worried about directing resources to Alzheimer's than you would about directing it to Ebola, because Alzheimer's is a guaranteed disaster that is rolling down the road at us at an enormous scale. So when I look at the NIH budget, if you said to me, where would I really shift resources? I'd say I'd shift them first to Alzheimer's. I shift them second to Ebola, but the place I'd really reform is the Food and Drug Administration. If you cut through all the red tape and all of the baloney it now takes to get something approved, you could dramatically increase the amount of private capital available for things like an Ebola vaccine because they'd have some reason to believe they could get to it. But we now have such long time horizons and so much bureaucratic baloney that we are killing our own capacity to develop new drugs. You go back and look at polio vaccine, which was implemented in 1 year. And it was implemented because the person who discovered it gave it to himself and his family. And they then called for volunteers, and hundreds of thousands of people said, because polio was so dangerous, they would take the risk. And they were literally vaccinating volunteers overnight. And they were prepared to do that because they wanted to get rid of they wanted to get rid of polio. Today, of course, we'd be told, well, you can't do that. It's a 7 to 9 year process, and you have to go through these things, and it's going to cost $1 billion plus. And this is totally wrong. So I think there is an excuse to look at Ebola and say, I think we need to reform the Food and Drug Administration. We need to reevaluate the National Institute of Health. And frankly, we need to be very tough about the Center for Disease Control. I mean, they have literally been behind the mark on this. You go back and look at SARS, which they responded to very aggressively, and within 5 months they had it under control. It's now been 10 months, and we're not even started down the road of getting it under control. And I think there has to be some serious critical look at the Center for Disease Control. So I see this as a moment to really rethink these things. My personal bias is I would absolutely cut off any visa from those 3 countries right now. We do not have to have people who have Ebola showing up in the US because they want to see a girlfriend they haven't seen in 8 years. We can tell them, wait a year or 2, when Ebola's gone, you can see the girlfriend. Consider Skype. Or have her come visit you in Liberia. I mean, But I think this whole argument of our elites, and this is an elite argument, and by the way, most of the public health people are on the wrong side of this because they all believe ideologically you can't do it. An amazing number of countries have already basically quarantined travel. And I am very uncomfortable with the idea that that we are not going to be relentlessly serious about this, and we are still today not relentlessly serious about it. So I regard ISIS and Ebola as two viruses that are epidemics that threaten our very civilization. And I'd rather overreact to both and get rid of them than underreact and have them potentially cripple our civilization. So let me toss it open for questions. Yes, sir. Now, how do we do this? Do we have microphones, or what do we do?
Mr. Speaker, I've got a microphone, and to make sure that it's on our live stream, I will come to the speaker. But first, I want the audience to acknowledge and thank you for your great remarks here. Thank you. I'm going to ask the President's grandson, Christopher Cox, who came all the way out here from New York. Got to be careful about this question because he's a lawyer, investment banker, well-traveled. But the first question goes to Chris Cox.
Thank you, Sandy. I thought for a second Sandy was going to say you got to be careful because I'm a fast-talking New Yorker. But thank you all for being here tonight. On behalf of the Nixon family, I want to welcome the speaker and Mrs. Gingrich to the library. My wife and I, Andrew, would like to welcome you. We always enjoy having you here. It was so wonderful to hear you talk, Mr. Speaker. My grandfather and you, I think, share a love of strategy. And one of my strongest memories of my grandfather is talking to him about the 1994 elections. It was March, about a month before he passed away, and we were looking over the map of the United States and looking at all the opportunities the Republicans had to win. I think as a young, precocious 14-year-old, I actually thought we had a chance at Hawaii. That didn't work out, but we won many other seats that year. And I see a similar sort of wave building to 1994, just like we had in 94 and 2010. And I was wondering if you could look and comment on the political scene, the potential the Republicans have to pick up some seats, and if the Republicans can win the Senate, maybe you can look at the future and see what the Republicans can do to make it a durable majority as opposed to a temporary or transient one. Thank you.
Well, let me, that's a great question. It's great to have you and Andrea here, and I'm very touched that you two would come out for this tonight. And as you know, I was very fond of your grandfather. I'm frankly very fond of your dad, who's doing a great job in New York and is really a very good civic leader. What I'm going to say, I want to start by pointing out that Green Bay won 2 weeks ago with 6 seconds to go and came from behind. So I just cite that. Callista's from Wisconsin. Our son-in-law's from Sheboygan. We own a share of Packer stock. So I just want to cite that because these elections aren't over till they're over. So I'm going to give you, as of tonight, my guess. But understand, there's still 2 weeks of very tough campaigning out there. And nobody should relax. Nobody should. I always tell people, you get to relax right after the recount. My guess is that you're going to see a very big wave. And my guess is that there was a poll that came out this morning that just indicated how many Americans just feel that things are a mess. And that it's not Ebola, it's not ISIS, it's not the economy, it's the totality of everything, that it's just a mess. Well, it's very tough on the White House party when you start building that kind of momentum. So all of the so-called experts right now believe the Republicans will take the Senate. I think they're almost certainly right. My guess is between 52 and 55 seats. I think we will probably break even or do slightly better than that in governorships. And I think we will gain somewhere between 6 and 14 or 15 seats in the House and gain 100 or more state legislative districts. So if you take the results of 2010 and the results of 2014, this will probably be the largest Republican Party since the mid-1920s. And I think all of you can thank Barack Obama in particular for having made that possible.
We're live streaming this, as all of you know, and when we do that, we ask people around the country, in fact around the world, if they'd like to ask questions and to email them in. So we're going to start with one, and I'll have to read it to you, Mr. Speaker. It'll come up here on the screen, as it just did, with an attractive picture from Bakersfield, California. What would President Nixon do if he was faced with the threat of ISIS today?
Well, let me say, first of all, this is a great excuse to pick up on Sandy's pitch for Henry Kissinger's talk on Wednesday, because there's no single person who would have a better understanding of what President Nixon would have done in a case like this than Henry Kissinger, who helped design those strategies. I believe he would, first of all, have been very, very strategic. If you watched all of Nixon's thinking, he very consistently tried to think in the long run. He tried to figure out what were the dynamics and what were the forces that were changing things. And he also was a realist. I mean, he understood that you couldn't ultimately overpower reality. So you had to find some way to get things done within a framework that was realistic. But I think that he would see that ISIS is today probably the greatest single threat to Western civilization in the near future. And I think he would have made it a very high priority. I think he also would have worked much harder at trying to figure out what Putin was up to, and would actually try to have managed the relationship with Putin rather than simply gotten into sort of if I might say, a recess yard brawl, which will achieve nothing. You'll notice that Crimea is now not even discussed. Ukraine's not discussed very much. Apparently, Putin met with the Western Europeans earlier this week, late last week, and basically said to them, you know, winter's coming, natural gas is good, you probably would like some. And I think he was very tough, and I just want to, Nixon would have understood this because Nixon thought about the fundamental. If you go back and read his book, Six Crises, which I read as a very young student, it's a terrific book, and it talks about lessons he learned going through certain things. And Nixon would have instantly understood that if your background was you were a colonel in the KGB, you probably weren't easy to intimidate. Because the guys who were easy to intimidate didn't get to be colonels. They didn't even get to be in the KGB. And so he would have approached Putin, I think, from a totally different standpoint of and again, Nixon was willing to go very tough. He and Kissinger at one point went to the edge of nuclear war to send a signal to the Soviets over the Middle East. Because they thought only by communicating that intensely would they understand how real it was. So it's not that he was soft or he was timid, but he was very clear about what he was trying to do and very willing to act in ways that forced his opponents to maneuver. And I think he would have built a lot of American effort around destroying radical Islamism in all of its various forms, not just ISIS.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting that you just mentioned President Nixon's memoirs, because I know you used to be a college professor, so I'm going to take that you gave this group an assignment. So those of you who don't already have a copy of Orrin's memoirs, you can buy it in our gift shop right after this program, all right? The next question comes from a 20-year-old Claremont McKenna College student named Daniel. Daniel?
Hello, Mr. Gingrich. My question as a freshman is this. What would your strategy be for improving the job prospects for graduating seniors? I know a lot of people are having a difficulty in this economy, and what's your strategy, essentially?
Well, I'm probably going to be a disappointment to you. My first strategy would be to minimize the amount you borrow. I mean, student loans are very seductive because they look like they're free money until you get out of school and you suddenly find out they actually want you to pay it back. And it's a little bit like what happens to people who get their first credit card and then realize that it actually wasn't free, which is a great shock to some people. So one, I would try to minimize debt. And the reason I try to minimize debt is you have a wider range of choices if you don't have to try to repay stuff. The second thing I would do is I would take any job I could get. I used to go crazy when liberals would say, oh, that's just a hamburger flipping job. Any job is good. And I would say to any young person, you tell me the field you want to be successful in, and my first advice is read biographies. So you want to get rich? Fine. Read about people who got rich. What did they do? How did they do it? There's a great line, one of the great books which shaped my life is the Confessions of an Advertising Man by Ogilvy, which is a remarkable memoir by the founder of Ogilvy Mather Advertising. And he says, as a young guy, he was, and each chapter is on an experience he had that helped shape him before he went into advertising. He went on a cruise ship to Alaska, I think it was in the late 30s. And this very successful older man was standing next to him looking out over the water, standing next to the rail. And the man said, I can tell you how you can be guaranteed to be a millionaire. And he said, cool, I mean, I'm available. He said, spend 10% less than you earn, whatever you earn, and take the 10% and buy real estate. He said, it is virtually impossible in America to invest 10% of your income starting in your 20s and not end up being a millionaire. He said, the problem that you will discover is it's very boring. And very few people have the discipline to spend 10% less than they earn and to put it into something which may take 15 years to mature. So I would say to you, figure out who you want to become someday and study 15 or 20 people who've become that and then imitate them. Imitation's so much cheaper than invention. Just go imitate them.
You're going to know fast if we have any realtors in the audience. They'll be on you. A USC graduate from Hollywood.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. 20 years ago, your Republican landslide happened. Not only when there were no smartphones, as you said, but there were no conservative blogs, there was no Fox News. How did you get your message out when you only had the mainstream media to filter it? And 20 years ago, in October of 1994, what were the polls predicting was going to happen, and what was the mainstream media predicting was going to happen?
It's a good set of questions, but they're actually very different questions. First of all, we were very fortunate because by 1993, Rush Limbaugh had become a national figure. And the degree to which Rush began to make things happen was very, very, very important. And there had been a lot of talk radio. So talk radio became the first serious alternative to mainstream media. Second, something I actually learned in part from Richard Nixon. We went to see Nixon and talked about the House Republican Party. I went to see him in New York. And he said, this was 5 or 6 years earlier. He said, look, the problem with the House Republican Party is simple. It's boring. When I was there in the late 40s, it was boring. It's still boring. He said, you can't attract candidates and you can't attract attention if you're boring. So go back and practice being unboring. And get 5 or 10 people together every week and practice being interesting. And that became the Conservative Opportunity Society. He also said to Congressman Guy Vanderjack, who was the head of the campaign committee, and Vanderjack told me this in the fall of '84. He said, until you are on the cover of Time and Newsweek, you will not penetrate deeply enough to win a majority. 2 weeks before the '94 election, we were on the cover of Time and Newsweek. And in a lot of ways, I would argue that if you took the best of Nixon as a strategist and the best of Reagan as a strategist, and you blended them, that's what you got in '94.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give you a quick recess and ask your wife, Calista, to stand. And I'm going to point out that this great book, Sea to Shining Sea, is her newest edition in Ellis the Elephant. And I want to know, I'd like you to share what your original inspiration was to write this great successful series.
Sure. Thanks, Sandy. Well, I do have the Ellis the Elephant series, and this is a guided tour of American history for 4 to 8-year-olds. And I write these books because I love America, and I believe America is truly an exceptional nation. And I think it's more important now than ever that our children understand what makes this country so special. And unfortunately today, many of our kids are failing to learn our American history, including our founding principles and values, and instead learning revisionist or politically correct history. So we owe it to our kids to give them the tools they need at a very early age so they can begin to appreciate the greatness of this nation.
Thank you. Now, we'll take one more from our live stream audience, and that question will appear on the screen with any luck, and it is from St. Louis, Missouri. What will the agenda be if the Republicans take the Senate?
Well, my hope is that if you look at a couple things, Senator Ted Cruz in the last day or so has put out a 10-point program. Speaker Boehner gave a speech at the American Enterprise Institute and outlined 6 major areas of reform. Paul Ryan and Marco Rubio have both been out laying out positive ideas. My hope is that the House and Senate Republicans will come together and decide that they are going to offer us a year of reform, and that they are going to, for example, the Veterans Committee in both the House and Senate has done terrific work and has a pretty good understanding of how big the change needs to be. And once we have a Republican Senate so that we can have a combined effort by the House and Senate, I would hope they would pass a very bold veterans reform bill. I think that should be true across the board. I think we need if you look at the Cures Act, which Congressman Fred Upton has introduced, for example, I think it's a big step. I think that Congressman Ryan, if he ends up being the head of Ways and Means, will produce, in fact, a very powerful tax reform bill that'll be a huge fight, but it'll be the right direction to a much more simplified model. A little bit to my surprise and to my great pleasure, in his list at the American Enterprise Institute, Speaker Boehner included litigation reform, and I think that it would be enormously helpful to the American economy. And I am so committed to litigation reform that even though I'm a conservative, I am prepared to back a federal retraining program for unemployed lawyers as a step towards achieving that. So I hope we'll have some real reforms.
Mr. Speaker, our final question from a lady who was born in Israel and lives in Los Angeles, who would like to ask,
how do we get the simplicity of your message here tonight to the Republican Party so they can act upon it?
Well, I would hope that you would help do that. I mean, this has been streamed live tonight. I suspect it's going to be available on the Nixon Library website. You know, I've spent my entire lifetime trying to suggest ideas to my party, and some years it's had a pretty big impact. We did Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less back in 2008, and it had a very big impact that year. We did the Contract with America, obviously. I think the work we're doing right now on replacing the manual typewriter and bureaucracy with a citizen-centered smartphone iPad thing potentially will revolutionize the whole system. But I really, if you call your congressman or your senator or people you donate to, and you say to them, gee, this is something you ought to do, it comes dramatically more effectively than if I call them. So I would say that part of the burden here is I'm happy to share the ideas, but I need lots of helpers at moving those ideas out across the country. Let me, Sandy, I just want you all to know I have been here 14 times, and he has made every single visit memorable. We're looking forward very much to working with Bill, and it's going to be terrific to have a new team, but I can also tell you that you have done extraordinary work at this library. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, that's why he's been here 14 times. He always says stuff like that. We'll book you 15, 16, 17 pretty quickly. Now, the Speaker and Callista both will be in the lobby before you get there, ready to sign your books, breakout, and from sea to shining sea. Thank you all for coming. Think about Henry Kissinger. He'll be here Wednesday, and you can order tickets at our front desk. Thank you for coming. God bless all of you, and God bless America.